Hello, and welcome to this week's Movie Math, where Project Hail Mary is looking more like Project Slam Dunk. Look at these numbers! A stunning second weekend hold of just 32%. My goodness. And while it's lagging slightly behind Oppenheimer, I mean, come on, that's Nolan, it is pacing ahead of other recent hits, Sinners and Dune Part 2, domestically. That's an important asterisk, which we're going to discuss. It's not doing as well overseas. It's not crashing and bombing over there, but it's going to take a toll on the overall box office, I think. We're going to talk about it. Now, last weekend, we talked about comps, right? And sure enough, with its second weekend drop, Project Hail Mary is performing like a supercharged version of The Martian and Gravity. Alone in space! Who'd ever think that would become a genre, right? Does Ripley qualify? I don't know. She had a crew, at least for a little while. So what's supercharging Project Hail Mary? Again, as I said last week, I think it's the fact that it also plays like an animated movie. And this whole past week, we already talked about that on Sunday, but all this week, Hollywood's been catching up as they too take note, not only of the film itself, but of course the animation resume of the directors, the producer, and the studio exec. And sure enough, Project Hail Mary is also performing along the lines of the first Incredibles, which I think we're gonna yoink, pick that as a comp as well. So worldwide, the movie's at 300 million. How far can it go? I know a lot of you probably have some very strong opinions on it, but we're gonna come up with an estimate. Remember, I know a lot of you like to say that in my heart, I didn't think that Avatar was going to do as well as it did. But with my head, I did successfully predict that it would come in around, the same distance between Wicked and Wicked 2 with the last Avatar movie. So we're going to do that again. We're going to take a look at the comps, and we're going to take a look at the upcoming competition. Now, you might be thinking, if it's right behind Oppenheimer now, it'll finish right behind Oppenheimer, and maybe it will domestically. But the real problem is that it's not, as I said, as strong overseas. That is something worth noting. And it doesn't have any major countries to go. It's not like, well, it hasn't hit this pocket of cash yet. It has. In fact, I think it only has one country left to go, in fact. It's the rare Hollywood movie that's doing better domestically. By just a scooch, but it's supposed to be, usually it's 60% overseas, 40% domestic for the overall haul. I think the difference might reflect the boost it's getting in North America from conservative audiences. With both, I wonder if you have noticed this, but I see Ryan Gosling and particularly writer Andy Weir doing more subtle, sometimes not so subtle, outreach to conservative moviegoers, but certainly somewhat under the radar. Whereas Doofus's Zachary Levi, Vince Vaughn, and Josh Duhamel were far too direct. This is how you do it, guys. In fact, I have to say, this pivot for Gosling fascinates me. I'm sure some channels will try to say it bothers me. It doesn't bother me. Get that back, bro. Ryan Gosling has been working for an extremely long time. He is one of those Hollywood stars who started, it's been debatable as to whether or not you could even call him a star for his entire career. He was well known. He had fans, but he's been around since he was a kid. So he's certainly paid his dues. But for this guy's whole career, he was largely for the girls and the gays. Why do you think he was cast in Barbie? And none of you had any respect for him when he played Ken, even though that was a love letter to bros. I just watched I'm Just Ken the other day again. What a wonderful sequence. And I, again, reflected at how a lot of guys didn't realize what a love letter Barbie, the movie, was to them and the pressures that men face. But yeah, now Ryan Gosling, suddenly all the bros are claiming them as his. They're like, we love Drive. And you're like, then why don't you see it in theaters? But it's fine. Again, I'm very happy for Ryan Gosling. It so far seems to be working very much in his favor. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this down when we get to the digital space where you're seeing a little bit of this boost as well. Very interesting. What do you think of that pivot for Ryan? And what's interesting? Unlike Sydney Sweeney's, I think, The Housemaid was very successful for her. But what's interesting to me is that like Project Hail Mary, the movie itself, Gosling has gotten new conservative fans, but yet also managed to maintain his original fan base. So that's really good. He's managed to expand without alienating. Oh, Star Wars is like, how'd you do it? He's going to go over to Star Wars, so maybe that'll help. So yes, as I said last Sunday, Project Hail Mary is definitely benefiting from the Top Gun effect. Although that movie had incredible box office across the board. It was 50-50 domestic and overseas, but when your numbers are that big, it's fine if the percentages aren't what they usually are. So where does Project Hail Mary finish at the end of the day? Super Mario, woohoo, is about, I think the poster for that movie is gorgeous. It's getting me excited. Also, the glowy stars, I hope they have them at my AMC. But anyway, it's I think it's like $50 for that popcorn bucket though. Popcorn bucketing is apparently an expensive hobby. All right, so Super Mario is about to take its premium screens from Project Hail Mary, but there isn't another major movie aimed at adult audiences until the end of April, when Michael from Lionsgate hits, which is expected to have one of the biggest openings of the year, probably even bigger than Project Hail Mary, but not as big as Super Mario, with 80 to 90 million stateside and perhaps even 100 million. And don't forget, Michael Jackson was and still is I think arguably still is. Michael Jackson fans are very sensitive about this. He's a divisive figure these days, but he's a global superstar. So you're probably looking at very strong box office across the board for that movie. If it's good, hopefully. It should be. The trailers have been fantastic. Do you have your Michael tickets? Okay, but that means, I'm going to see it to review, but I also have some tickets for opening weekend as well. But that means 3 more weekends for Project Hail Mary before Michael comes along. So I'm going to, all right, you write your predictions down below, but I'm going to cautiously, never say never. But I'm going to predict it finishes around where The Martian, The Incredibles, and Gravity did. I'm going to put it in that space, in the mid-600s to the mid-700s. And the reason I'm doing that is because of the weak overseas box office. Maybe we'll see something change, but it's already been 2 weeks. And as I said, it doesn't have any major countries left to go. So that gives me a little pause and makes it not quite as high as Oppenheimer ended up doing. By the way, if you live outside of North America, why do you think Project Hail Mary isn't as popular there as it is here in the North America region? I'm very curious about this. Last Sunday on Movie Math, I listed, as did, everybody in Hollywood was talking about the fact that Project Hail Mary had performed extraordinarily well for an original non-franchise opening film. And when I put up this list, some of you are like, whoa, the Da Vinci Code and 300 shouldn't be on here because they are franchises. Well, they didn't start out as franchises. They became franchises because the first films were so successful. So therefore, they spawned sequels. And it turns out, so might Project Hail Mary. I know some of you might be appalled right now. I'm very curious to hear your reaction to this. All right, so Amazon MGM didn't come right out and say it, but they did let it be known, shmumana whispering around, they're open to the idea, although they want the security of writer Andy Weir coming up with the storyline rather than giving the task to a Hollywood screenwriter. Why don't go get some animation screenwriters? We'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm wondering if audiences would be interested in the further adventures of Dr. Ryland Grace and Rocky. Some of you might be like, that defeats the whole purpose of the movie. But then at the same time, perhaps they could become the new Mandalorian and Grogu. At least Rocky talks. But as I say that, I think, the Mandalorian and Grogu have hit some rough waters, right? As they struggle to, what is the tone, right? It's very hard to hit the right tone. And some of us feel the Mandalorian and Grogu maybe have gone a little bit too kiddie. The Joker sequel didn't end up being a horrible idea. And, maybe perhaps because of that, Margot Robbie and Greta Gerwig are right to say they're not going to make another Barbie. But again, as I said, don't forget the Project Hail Mary has strong animation influences. It's doing very well with families. It is a good family film, I think. So animation sequels have done extraordinarily well. And a lot of times people are like, you can't do it. How would you do a sequel to that? And, animation has done a wonderful job coming up with and they're still very much in the feels like Project Hail Mary. So I think if you think of Project Hail Mary from that angle, the animation perspective, there might be something here. And while Ryan Gosling, as well as Phil Lord and Chris Miller, are booked and busy animation sequels have been able to take their time. It was 14 years between the two Incredibles movie, 10 between the next two, and 9 years between the Inside Out films. Would you be open to a Project Hail Mary sequel? And when you think of it as an animated style kind of movie, does that make you maybe feel a little bit more open to the idea? It is currently spring break. Do you have spring break overseas? Well, we do here in North America. We sure do. That's why, and so people are going to party. They don't care about the TSA lines. And good for them. They shouldn't have to lose their spring break vacation. I mean, here in New York City, we are overrun already. So that coupled with this coming weekend being Easter weekend, the box office is expected to explode. Super Mario Galaxy is going to hit the ground running, opening in theaters on Wednesday. And remember, spring break means that kids and teens don't have school, so they can go to the movies on Wednesday. There are no Tuesday afternoon showtimes. I believe it starts at midnight on Tuesday. They're like, hey, we're opening on Wednesday. Come on. And it's expected to match the debut of the first film, which opened Easter weekend 2023 and did $204 million in the first 5 days. And by the time Easter was over, it had $224 million. While Easter was later in 2025, Minecraft used the same strategy of opening the first weekend of April and had similar success as another video game-based movie with a fan base of all ages. And since Project Hail Mary is live action, and this is a very long holiday weekend, and again, also spring break, both movies should be able to fill up their Easter baskets with cold hard cash. Even losing its premium screens, I think Project Hail Mary is likely to see not only another strong hold in its third weekend, but could have even a smaller drop than it did this weekend. What are your, it's Easter. Yeah, it's not necessarily spring break everywhere, but it is Easter in most places, for those of you who celebrate. What are your holiday movie-going plans? The first Super Mario movie blasted its way by the end of the day to 1.3 million. And obviously Nintendo and Universal are hoping to improve on that number. Already teasing a lot of surprise guest stars from other Nintendo properties, making fans wonder if they might be getting a Super Smash Bros. Movie up next. That's like the Avengers of Nintendo, it seems. That would give fans maybe the animated Link they feel bad they're not getting. And remember, Pikachu is partly owned by Nintendo. So could they be backdooring a Pikachu or a Pokemon animated movie? The Netflix series never really came to fruition. Could that maybe be partially why? Very interesting. This would be a great opportunity to see which characters stand out here, test them for their own potential spin-off movies, just like Minions spun out of the Despicable Me movies. Which Nintendo characters are you hoping might get the Illumination animated treatment? Back to this weekend's box office. Hollywood did two actresses dirty, as Samara Weaving and Zazie Beetz found themselves basically starring in the exact same movie, released back to back, and unfortunately ended up taking each other out in the process. They Will Kill You opened under Ready or Not 2's $9 million from last weekend, but did cause a sequel to drop 56%. Not bad for that kind of movie, but imagine how much better it would have done if a duplicate movie hadn't opened opposite it. Ready or Not 2 has much better audience scores, so that should give it a bit more staying power. But now, both movies are basically racing, will they open it on digital at the same time as well, or close to each other? I mean, they're going to have a round 2 on digital. Probably sooner rather than later, because neither one's doing that well. Hoppers, interestingly enough, is also at $300 million worldwide, although it has a little more time in theaters than Project Hail Mary. But Super Mario Bros. Is obviously going to be a much bigger problem for this film. So I think that Hoppers is actually not going to be able to catch Elemental's $496, and it's actually quite low for a Pixar movie. But I think there's still a lot of value in the goodwill that it's brought back to the studio, and it should do very well down the line on digital and then on Disney+. There's such good word of mouth on Hoppers, but yet it seems a lot of you still haven't decided to see it in theaters. Why is that? All right, also, it's worth noting that GOAT managed to come across the century mark domestically, even though it's already now on digital, and it's doing very well there as well. And wow, Durandahar 2 The Revenge, which might have fallen 53% in its second weekend stateside, but still managed to stay in the top half of the top 10. And many of you wanted me to point out, I saw, that it's not only impressive because the movie continues to play in under 1,000 theaters while its competition is playing in thousands, multiple thousands of theaters, but the movie is also 4 hours long, so it has less showtimes per theater as well. So yes, very, very impressive. And I want to say, I saw a couple of movie fans out of India sharing clips from Movie Math last week, and I really appreciated that. So I wanted to say to you, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Badhai Ho, which I believe is congratulations in Hindi. Moving over to streaming, starting with Nielsen as usual, this time for the last week of February, what's the most interesting thing about this chart is what's not on it, and that's A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. It's not on the originals or the acquired chart either. Nielsen's been a little sketchy on how they categorize some shows lately. A Night of the Seven Kingdoms is an original show for HBO Max. But anyway, it had finished its season, all 6 episodes, on February 22nd, which was the Sunday right before this chart. So if it had gotten any kind of sizable binge bump, it should have charted. But thankfully, the show is cheap to make. They're moving ahead on the next season. And like Hoppers, brought a lot of goodwill to the franchise. Although some fans and creator George R.R. Martin have weaponized it against House of the Dragon and that showrunner, Ryan Condal, who is dead to George R.R. Martin. We'll see who has the last laugh with season 3 of House of the Dragon, which premieres in June. And while people might get a little frustrated with that show, both seasons were able to chart very strongly. Have you watched A Night of the Seven Kingdoms? It's very good. If you still have not watched it yet, why not? As for the content that did chart, Netflix's franchise factory continues to hum along very nicely, with Bridgerton and the Night Agent dominating. Bridgerton has decided to use its tremendous capital to back a lesbian romance for the next season. There, of course, has been a lot of LGBT content on streaming at this point, but some people are pointing out the lack of period LGBT romances. Although there was, I think, a lesbian lead show a couple of years ago, which looked pretty cool. Didn't do very well, though. And does Interview with the Vampire kind of count as well? I would think it does. I'm so excited for season 3. Lestat. But let's see. Let's see if this franchise truly understands its fan base, or if the passed over Eloise, who many expected or hoped would be the focus of the next season, trended all day when that announcement was made for a reason. How do you feel about this focus for the next season? And there's weekly show The Pit continuing to be an absolute monster for HBO and also very cheap to make. HBO keeping those prices down. Sometimes. All right, then with the start of season 2, Paradise is back in it, baby. A big hit for Hulu. And they've, in fact, greenlit season 3, which I'm so happy about because I love this show and I've really enjoyed season 2. They didn't give us a screener for the season finale. You know, I've seen everything. I was able to watch in advance everything through episode 7. And what a cliffhanger. So I'm very excited to see the season finale for the show this week. Love Paradise. Speaking of finales, The Traitors was able to jump onto the overall chart as Rob Roush won. And he has just signed with Hollywood mega agency UTA, so you're going to be seeing even more of him. They're at least going to try. Do you want to see more Rob? I like Rob. Not too much happening on the originals chart, as you can see here, nor on the movies chart. Although you can see that Jurassic World Rebirth did pretty nicely on Netflix, underscoring that it's still worthwhile for other studios, even though they have their own streaming services, to lease their content to the Coca-Cola of streaming services. On Netflix's own charts for just last week, the Peaky Blinders movie did solid numbers, although I saw some people on social media say it was as bad a wrap-up to the show as Game of Thrones Season 8. Whew! Thank goodness! I never watched the original show, but I watched this movie, and the first 20 minutes were actually excellent. But then I was like, why did anybody ever watch this show? It stinks. You know, it was funny. Rebecca Ferguson's character said to Cillian Murphy, or Cillian, I never know which one it is. She was like, I'm not going to fix what's wrong with you with words. And I was like, is it with smooches? And it was with smooches. By the way, who would cast Rebecca Ferguson, who's Swedish, as a Romani temptress? You know, I mean, I think, you know, I love Elizabeth Olsen so much as Scarlet Witch that I'm okay with it, but I know it frustrates a lot of you. And so, I mean, like, I don't think we should go back and undo a popular casting, but we don't have to keep making the same mistake either. All right, and in its third week on these charts, War Machine is still doing very nicely, despite, or maybe benefiting from, Alan Ritchson's recent roid road rage. Nice alliteration. Was Ritchson in the right? How do you feel about him after that beatdown? And speaking of steroids, Louis Theroux's Inside the Manosphere held steady with no drop in views, although it was a weekend versus a week. But just like last week's chart, it was at 6.3 million views, which means word of mouth has been very strong. Seriously, is K-pop Demon Hunters going to be on this chart forever? It might be. The merch is finally starting to come through to tide us over until the sequel in 2029. But again, animation sequels can take a very long time. That's crazy. But anyway, what's really worth noting, though, is that directing duo Maggie Kang and Chris Applehands cut a deal that with participation in merch and music will end up probably netting them combined about $50 million, which interestingly enough is what Margot Robbie made off of Barbie. Ka-ching! But in this case, it's very nice, although Margot Robbie was also a producer on Barbie. But it's, usually animation talent can do the voice talent does extremely well off of those movies. We just saw that recent Frozen headline, although they've been saying that's misleading. They're like, we didn't make that much money. And you're like, I bet it was pretty close. But anyway, it's really nice to see the behind the scenes talent also participating in the financial success of their movies. Although we're not privy, or at least we haven't been, to the deals for name talent. Let's say, I wonder how much Brad Bird is made off of The Incredibles. But they're usually in-house employees, which tends to hurt their deals potentially. Again, it hasn't really been discussed up until now, but I welcome the transparency. I think they have earned every penny of that money, especially since they saw so little off of the first film. All right, that just goes to show you, by the way, how much Netflix is making off of it. They're like, sure, we'll pay you that much money. And I think they increased how much they were paying Sony as well. All right, so anyway, with shows, One Piece, still number one, although it continues to be much softer than the first season. But again, Netflix is already all in on season 3. For those of you who are fans of One Piece, or still fans of One Piece since the numbers are down, why do you think the numbers are down for season 2? And what do you think that they can do to get people back in on season 3? Then on digital, with Apple's charts, Send Help, it's so nice to see it getting some love here. Although, it's because it doesn't have to compete with the Iron Lung as it did in theaters. While GOAT, as I said, is also very strong. The Housemaid also continues to be strong, while Avatar, which just hit digital, is only doing okay. Interestingly, both Avatar and Send Help will eventually end up on Disney Plus and Hulu. So why are some of you waiting for Avatar at no extra cost, so you can watch it then, but you are willing to pay to watch Send Help digitally now? Is it because you missed Send Help in theaters? That's interesting. How to Make a Killing didn't make a killing in theaters, and it's not making a killing on digital. But as many of you pointed out, he still was able to sign on to voice Fox McCloud in the upcoming Super Mario Galaxy movie. Although I'm sure he made that deal because animation has so much lead time before How to Make a Killing, or even The Running Man hit theaters. Back when it seemed like Glenn Powell might be a movie star. Maybe Fox McCloud will save him. And hey, there's some retroactive love here for Ryan Gosling's one of his most brotastic films, The Nice Guys, which is currently on sale for just $10. Now, I'm sure some of you will try to argue with me that The Nice Guys was a success when it was in theaters. It was not. It came out in 2016, and it was out of the top 10 after only 3 weekends, and had pretty weak audience scores. You guys drive me nuts with some of this, rose-colored glasses, retroactive stuff. I'm glad you're discovering it now. It's a solid movie. I'm very curious, but I think those audience scores are pretty accurate, actually. It really, I think, benefits from just Ryan Gosling's charisma, and to a degree, Russell Crowe's. All right, I'm very curious, though, to see how Ryan Gosling, his brotastic pivot, but while still holding on to his original fans, works out for him. As I said, it could be very helpful to Star Wars, which has angered many a bro. And then I am curious to see how that same audience responds to whatever he's doing for the Daniels, which I would be very surprised if that was broy. But, again, can Ryan Gosling please both audiences? That, to me, he is with Project Hail Mary, although not overseas. It's very interesting to me. I'm excited to see how this evolves. As for this coming week, yes, it's Super Mario Galaxy time. Are you excited? It hits theaters on Wednesday. When are you going to be seeing it? How many times are you going to be seeing it this weekend? And the review embargo, some of you have asked, it lifts on Tuesday afternoon. Critics weren't kind to the first movie. I didn't care for it. So I'm not surprised that the review embargo lifts right near when the movie hits theaters. And I got to tell you, I don't think it's going to hurt the movie if it's a rotten score once again. In fact, I think for some fandoms, it's a badge of honor, right? So we'll see. Well, I mean, the most important thing is how fans feel about it. So I'm curious to see that reaction. I will be reviewing it. I'm very excited. Again, I told you I'm actually now looking forward to it. Although I'm going to clearly label my review from someone who is not a Nintendo Super Mario fan. All right, so the drama also, but I can still have fun at the party. All right, the drama, I did not have fun at this party. The drama also hits theaters on Friday, where TMZ, I will admit, seems to have waged a personally waged war on this film, including spoiling the big twist. We'll see how audiences react. When it comes to edgy films, I'm wondering what's the comp here. I think it either goes the way of good Ari Aster, like Hereditary and Midsommar, or bad Ari Aster, like Beau is Afraid or Eddington. Well, I'm very curious to see the reaction to this film. This review embargo lifts on Tuesday morning, although I have chosen, as I said on Twitter, not to review it. On digital this week, Tuesday, we've got 2 kinky romances dropping, Wuthering Heights and Pelion, as well as Scream 7. Hulu has an original film on Friday, Pizza Movie, with one of the Stranger Things stars. I forgot his name. All right. The one I'm not a huge fan of. All right. So anyway, then while the week after this, we'll be seeing some huge shows dropping. Like really, the week after this is a big deal for shows. This week, there's only 2, which is weird. I guess I feel people want to go out for the holiday weekend. It's spring break, stuff like that. That's fair. So we're getting the 2 third seasons. XO Kitty on Netflix on Thursday, and Your Friends and Neighbors on Apple TV starting Friday. That's a weekly. I liked the first season of Jon Hamm's show quite a bit, so I was excited when I got screeners for the second season, but I have to tell you, they did not figure out a good way to continue it, and I stopped watching after the first episode. I was like, no, thank you. All right, and that's this week's movie map. It's much more R-rated, by the way. All right, not in a fun way. All right, and that's this week's movie math. What have you been watching? What do you plan to watch? And again, where do you think Project Hail Mary will end its box office run worldwide? Share those thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.